Hi, this is Daryl Myatt from Keller, Texas. Today is Thursday, June 28th, 2012. Let's have a look at some things in the news today that point us to Bible prophecy and letting us know that we're getting closer and closer to the return of Jesus Christ every day. Here's a story out of Arutz Sheva. Headline says, Fatah to Israel, do what we want or face intifada. If Israel does not surrender all the lands liberated in the Six-Day War of 1967, set up an Arab state with Jerusalem as its capital, and make significant concessions in accepting as citizens descendants of Arabs who fled Israel in 1948, a third intifada should and must be conducted. Okay, you know what? I say bring it on. Go ahead with your intifada. Israel will wipe you out, and if they don't, God will. Very clear. Psalm 83 verse 2, after it lists later on in that chapter all the enemies of Israel, it calls in verse 2 all these people and nations enemies of God. There's a reason. Accepting as citizens descendants of Arabs who fled Israel in 1948. Okay, there was about 200,000 Arabs who fled Israel in 1948, of which there's about 25,000 of them left still alive. But the descendants, they claim, number in the range of 5 to 7 million. They want all of them to be able to come back into Israel. That's because that way they could demographically wipe the Jewish people out by making the Jewish people in Israel a minority at that point. The call for the new uprising of the people against Israel was part of a summation statement issued at the end of the two-day Palestinian Revolutionary Council General Meeting held this week. The meeting was led by Palestinian Authority Chief and Fatah Party head Mahmoud Abbas. This is the guy leading the Palestinians, trying to create a two-state solution and trying to make peace with Israel. They're saying, give us all the land from 1967, Jerusalem as our capital, make significant concessions and accept all these Arabs, up to 7 million of them, as citizens. If you don't, we're going to go to war. Bring it. That's what I say. Bring it. The statement declares its support for Abbas's ongoing refusal to back down from positions that have proven unacceptable to Israel in the past, including demands that Israel agree in principle to accept as citizens descendants of Arabs who fled their homes in 1948. Abbas has also declared that he will refuse to discuss anything with Israel until all settlement activity is ended. That precondition has also been unacceptable to Israel, but in its statement, the PRC said that it supported Abbas on that as well. Well, of course it does. The PA will also make another attempt to be recognized as a state by the United Nations this year. Last year, the PA statehood bid was stopped after many months of intense diplomatic activity by Israel, but analysts said that the PA was less likely to back down this time and would insist that the matter be brought before the Security Council. The statement also expresses ongoing support for attempts to reunite Fatah and Hamas in the PA government. It also praised the election of Mohamed Morsi as president of Egypt, saying that it indicates that Egypt is on the way to resume its major role in the Arab world. Speaking of Egypt, IDF, the Israel Defense Force, is preparing for a southern border hostility now. They're back to beefing up forces along the Sinai border with construction of bases, security equipment, and new training areas, just because of the Muslim Brotherhood taking control in Egypt. Here's a reason why a Palestinian state is a bad idea. Okay, first of all, let me just point out, Palestinians don't want peace with Israel. They want all of the land of Israel to become Palestine. Make no mistake, they don't want peace. That's why Mahmoud Abbas has been making these incredibly ridiculous demands before he'll come sit down at the peace table, because peace is not his goal. He knows his demands are ridiculous. He knows Israel will not agree to them. That's why he makes them. They don't want peace. They want Israel and all the Jews to be driven from the land. They want to finish the job Hitler started back in 1941, 42, whenever that was, when he was killing all the Jews, when he killed over 6 million of them in the Holocaust. They want them to go away, one way or another, either economically, militarily, demographically, or however else they can do it, politically, hopefully, they say. Hamas revelation shows why Palestinian state is a bad idea. Hamas this week published an interview with one of their operatives recently released from an Israeli prison that once again demonstrates why allowing the creation of a sovereign Palestinian state is a bad idea. Ahmed Akram Salmi told the official Hamas website that prior to being arrested, he had been part of a cell that was producing rockets and missiles in Samaria, the so-called West Bank. The cell established a manufacturing facility near the de facto Palestinian capital of Ramallah and intended to launch attacks on high-profile Israeli targets. The most obvious rocket targets were the Knesset building, the Ben Gurion airport, and other cities, the most prominent of which was Tel Aviv, said Salmi. The West Bank surrounds most of Jerusalem, and its western edge sits on the hills overlooking greater Tel Aviv, putting all of these areas within range of even the least sophisticated terrorist rockets. Salmi said the rocket program was only thwarted because incessant suicide bombings had resulted in Israel launching a major 2002 military offensive known as Operation Defense Shield. If Salmi's former aspirations seem far-fetched from a geopolitical point of view, the example of the Gaza Strip proves they remain very realistic and provide good reason for Israel to view the establishment of a Palestinian state with grave concern. The thinking of most of Israel's leaders and international power brokers is that the Palestinian Authority would behave pragmatically and never allow Hamas to carry out such attacks despite its own distaste for Israel. Yeah, right. But that assessment fails to take these two important factors into account. In anything resembling a democratic setting, the Arab street will elect to power the movement that appears strongest and most capable of inflicting damage on perceived enemies. That is why Hamas stunned the world by winning the last Palestinian election so handily. It would likely do so again in a newly established Palestinian state. Number two, where Hamas denied the right to exercise its democratically won powers in a new Palestinian state, it would simply seize control by force of arms as it did in Gaza, barring, of course, any major military intervention by Israel or Western powers, which would be unlikely. Some try to counter this by insisting that being made the head of a real state would force Hamas to behave in a more diplomatic and pragmatic manner. This same failed argument was made when Hamas won its coup in Gaza. And you see what they used Gaza for, launching missiles and rockets into Israel. You think they wouldn't continue such activity if they were to get Judea and Samaria as their own state? They could see their targets from the hills of Judea. Anyway, all evidence of the past decade suggests that an independent Palestinian state would quickly be either taken over or handed over by the voters to radical Islamic elements that do not accept Israel's existence. Those elements would either carry out or facilitate attacks on Israel that would at best perpetuate the current situation and at worst escalate hostilities to unprecedented levels. So, it's hard to see how an independent Palestinian state would benefit anyone outside of those seeking death and destruction. Palestinian state's a bad idea. Mr. Netanyahu, please do not give up the land that God gave your forefathers. Here's a story out of Jerusalem Post. Hamas says Mossad assassinated al-Mahu deputy. Okay. Listen to this story. Hamas yesterday announced that one of its senior members was assassinated in Damascus, Syria, and quickly blamed Israel for it. Okay, so you've got the regime of Bashar Assad fighting against their own people. You've got the opposition fighting against the regime of Bashar Assad. And here's Hamas leader who was killed in Damascus. So everyone points the finger at Israel? Really? The announcement posted on the terrorist group's official website said it was unknown who killed Kamal Ranaja, also known as Nizar Abu Mujad. These names. However, a senior Hamas official later told AFP, according to our information, Mossad was behind the assassination. Of course, Mossad is the Israeli intelligence force, much like America's CIA or Great Britain's MI6, whatever. I just find this story amazing that here's Damascus, where there's fighting going on all over the place. This guy gets killed, and Hamas says, it was Israel. Everything's Israel's fault, isn't it? Moving on. Did you hear what Mr. Mohammed Mursi was spouting off in a speech? You can go to theblaze.com and check out this speech made by this man. Frightening speech. He says the Quran is our constitution. Egyptian president promises to ignore Egyptian constitution for the sake of Sharia law in a very chilling speech. Anyway, watch the video. I can't even begin to give you an idea of what this man said. He says the Quran is our constitution, and it will continue to be our constitution. The Prophet Muhammad is our leader. Jihad is our path. And death for the sake of Allah is our most lofty aspiration. Allah is our goal, he says. He said, I take an oath before Allah and before you all that regardless of the actual text of the Constitution, Allah willing, the text will truly reflect the Sharia. Okay, let me just say, if you're not familiar with Sharia law, it's pretty much death to all non-Muslims. Jews and Christians are to be hated in Sharia law. They're to be killed or charged a crazy exorbitant tax to be able to remain living. Just so you know, their hadith says, "Oh Muslim, the rocks and trees will say, oh Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me, come kill him." That's the mentality of these people. And now Egypt, one of the strongest in the Middle East, is being led by these kind of haters who don't really know God and don't know Jesus. They pray to this demon Allah. You probably saw this in the news today as one of the first things I heard this morning. Blast hits Damascus. Turkey sends troops to border. Blast hits Damascus. You know, one of these mornings I'm going to wake up and see something like nuclear bomb falls in Damascus, or Damascus leveled by such and such bomb. This kind of sent chills up my spine this morning when I saw this. Giant blast hits Damascus. I was like, surely not Isaiah 17:1 today. Really? Is it? Continuing watching, I saw it wasn't quite yet, but it's very soon coming, it looks like, with everything going on there. This out of Beirut and Reuters. Rebel forces attack Syria's main court in central Damascus today, state television said, while Turkey deployed troops and anti-aircraft rocket launchers to the Syrian border, building pressure on President Bashar Assad. A loud explosion echoed through the streets and a column of black smoke rose over Damascus, an Assad stronghold that until the last few days had seemed largely beyond the reach of rebels. State television described it as a terrorist blast. Dozens of wrecked and burning cars were strewn over a car park used by lawyers and judges. The state news agency SANA said 3 people had been wounded by a bomb hidden in one of the cars. You know what? Isaiah 17:1, the prophecy against Damascus, says it will be utterly destroyed. It'll be a ruinous heap and no longer exist as a city. We could be seeing this news headline tomorrow or in the next few days. I know you guys are probably tired of hearing me talk about Syria, but people, I think the events we're watching are leading up to the Isaiah 17:1 prophecy being fulfilled right in front of our eyes in this day and age. This prophecy that's over 2,500 years old is about to come to pass. Here's a story out of Haaretz. Turkey sends armed forces to Syrian border following downing of Turkish jet. Turkey deployed anti-aircraft guns and other weapons alongside its border with Syria, state television reported today. Military trucks, anti-aircraft guns in a military outpost across the border where Syrian forces and rebels clashed in recent months. Turkey is fortifying their border with Syria, possibly preparing for something coming up. Who knows? Here's a story out of Yahoo. Russia rejects external solution for Syria. Russia today dampened any hopes of a diplomatic breakthrough in efforts to end the Syria conflict, saying it opposed solutions from the outside and Syrians should decide the fate of President Bashar Assad. I'm not going to read all of this story, but wow, this story talking about the 15,000 or more that have already been killed, and this Sergei Lavrov saying that Syria needs to fix Syria's problems. Said Assad's fate must be decided within the framework of Syrian dialogue by the Syrian people themselves. You know, I agree to that to an extent. How long do you allow the killing to continue? How long before someone says, you know what, this has to stop? And I understand, you know, the United States back in like 1860 or whenever had our own civil war. Kingdom against kingdom, by the way, that Jesus spoke of. And how would we have felt if, say, Russia or Great Britain at the time came in and started bombing people? It would have been a problem, I agree. But how long do you allow the killing to continue? How long before somebody steps in and says, okay, this has to change? There was a quote in here that I'd like to share. Well, I don't see it, and this story's pretty long. But anyway, it talked about, you know, Syria needs to take care of their own issues, not any outside force. Okay. 16 plus months and 15,000 plus dead. When you going to take care of it, Syria? What's it going to take? Here's a story, kind of a sign of the times. This comes, I saw this in several places, but this particular story says American Muslims stone Christians. Yeah, you're probably thinking, oh yeah, Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, where? Dearborn, Michigan. Of all places, American Muslims stone Christians in Dearborn, Michigan. Again, another disturbing video shows what happened when a group of Christians tried to merely hold up signs about Christianity at the 2012 Dearborn, Michigan Arab Festival. The Christians were viciously attacked verbally and physically and ultimately stoned by these Muslims, throwing rocks at them in America. Really? So Muslims can attack Christians here on American soil, and the police did nothing. Despite the U.S. Constitution that guarantees freedom of religion, the police, who ignored the mob violence, asked the sign holders to leave, saying they were endangering the public. No police action was taken against the mob. I'm sorry, isn't assault and battery still a crime? Despite losing two similar freedom of speech lawsuits in the past, one of which cost the city of Dearborn $100,000, the city refused to protect the sign holders' constitutional rights, claiming lack of manpower. According to the police chief, 2 police officers would have been needed to protect the Christians. The chief said this would be impossible since there was a big crowd to watch. Really? 2 officers is impossible? Wow, Dearborn, Michigan. Epic fail. Ironically, there was no violence or threat of violence, hence no need for police presence or protection, at any other location at the festival except where the Christians were holding their signs. At the end of the video, you'll see the police threaten to arrest the Christians, who incidentally never retaliated at the mob. You know what? I have a hard time. If somebody is striking me or throwing rocks at me, I have a very hard time not to beat the crap right out of them. Okay? Pardon my language, but that's how I am. I'm glad I wasn't there, because I would have had to take somebody down and just pound their head. Forgive me, but at least I'm honest about it. Somebody wants to get all up in my face because I'm standing there with a sign. They want to start physically abusing me and beating on me. At that point, I have a hard time turning the other cheek. Just me. You know, maybe it's not. It's probably you too. A lot of you guys out there, especially on American soil. You know, yeah, if I were in Saudi Arabia holding up a Christian sign, I'd probably be afraid for my life. But at that point, I'd be very humble and meek and mild. In America, though, you're in my country. Don't even come impose your religious beliefs and your Sharia law in my country. This is America. We have a constitution that protects this, but apparently not anymore. After the Christians leave with a police convoy as their escort, their car is stopped and 12 officers appear to question and possibly arrest them. In America, people, it's coming. It's coming, especially if we get a Muslim reelected in the White House this November. Have you noticed the amount of fires going on in America? America is on fire. You've probably heard of Colorado. Well, there's more than just Colorado. There's actually 33 fires going on in America right now. More fires than there has ever been in American history, ever. Why do you suppose that is? Could have something to do with Obama and his health care, which I'm sure you've seen that passed by a huge, overwhelming margin of 5-4 today. So now, great, we all get to pay for abortions. Yay! Let's just add more sin and vileness and pile it up so high that heaven has to do something about it. Yeah, let's make everyone pay for abortions. Let's approve some people in society having the RFID chip implanted under their skin. Yay, the mark of the beast is that much closer. Obamacare. Oh, heaven help us. Heaven help us. Matthew 15:21-28. In verse 28, Jesus answered her, O woman, great is your faith. Be it done for you as you desire. And her daughter was healed instantly. You know, the distinction between clean and unclean animals may be designed to remind Israel of the fall. Clean animals are visibly separated from the ground by cloven hooves or scales and fins that enable them to swim away from the ocean floor. Leviticus 11, verse 3. Unclean animals touch the earth directly. They have paws or crawl upon the sea bottom because they lack fins and scales. Other taboo creatures eat dead flesh. And since Adam's sin brought a curse on the ground and death, not eating animals associated with such things reminded Israel of creation's brokenness, cultivating hope for the curse's removal and the world's return to its original goodness. Now on the cross, Jesus took the curse upon himself. Galatians 3, verse 13. And now all creation wait for its goodness to be made fully manifest. Romans 8, 19-21. With the curse broken, what was unclean is now clean, and so the old Mosaic food laws need not be followed in the new covenant. You know, even Jesus said it's not what goes into a man's stomach that makes him unclean, but what comes out of the heart. So, even Jesus declared all foods clean. I have to admit, I've never followed those Levitical laws of the food. I love me some pork. I eat bacon. I eat shrimp. Love it. Crab legs. You probably do too. Please don't be hating on me and calling me names and saying, oh, you backslider. Because it's not what goes into the stomach that defiles a man. It's what comes out of his heart. People haven't changed much in 4,000 years. So, I'm not under the law. I'm under grace. Say what you want. I can handle it. But removing the curse will also end the division between Jew and Gentile. This truth was hinted at in Matthew 15:21-28. As Christ nears Tyre and Sidon, a Gentile woman approaches Jesus and begs him to heal her daughter. He ignores her at first, but then he tells her his mission is to Israel. He's not denying salvation to the Gentiles. He's reminding her that he comes to Israel before going to the nations. Even Jesus said, when he told his disciples, go into Israel. And then you will not go into every city in Israel. Well, I hate when I start to quote a verse and then forget exactly how it goes. I don't want to misquote, so I'm just going to drop it there. But Jesus did say, and this gospel preached to Israel, Judea, and Samaria, and to the ends of the world. But it starts in Israel.
Jesus later talks to this woman about giving the children's bread to the dogs, and it's a related story. God, the good Father, feeds his children, his people Israel, prior to feeding the others. Anyway, God didn't shut up his grace among the Jews in such a manner as to not bestow a small taste of them onto Gentiles also. Throughout history, there have been Gentiles who have come to trust the God of Israel. Yet God is the covenant Lord of Israel, and therefore the gospel goes to the Jew first. But we need to take time to pray for the physical sons of Abraham, that they would come to know Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God, the real Jesus, not the fake one talked about in the Quran, but the real Jesus, the Son of the living God, God in flesh. Let's talk about our gifts for his kingdom. In 1 Corinthians 12, verses 4 through 7, read that passage. I'm not going to read it for sake of time, but a lot of people hear the word serve, and they feel that they don't have the necessary qualities to make a difference in other people's lives. This is true apart from God, okay? God has gifted each and every one of us with unique gifts and talents with a specific purpose in mind. His plan for us involves using these talents to serve him for the good of others. You know, Satan would like us to believe otherwise. The enemy wants us to notice what others are doing and then feel inferior to them for it. Okay? For instance, you know, I've heard women say, I'm just a housewife, what can I do? Or, you know, I'm just a janitor, what can I do? I'm just a kid, what could I possibly do? They see people preaching and singing in the choir, and they wish they could accomplish something as great for the kingdom of God. But there could be nothing further from the truth. We're all gifted. We're all given talents by God. A great responsibility rests with those who train their children in righteousness. You know, in fact, the Holy Spirit has gifted each believer for a specific work in God's kingdom. You know, Scripture explains this idea by a comparison with the human body. You know, each person has gifts and purposes that make the entire system function well. But if the heel wants to be an eye, the whole being will lose balance. You know, we're not all called to be an ear or an eye or a finger or a toe. You know, some of us are a shoulder or a kneecap, whatever. Each part is very crucial. Of course, it's Jesus that's the head, even though there are some that are less noticeable than others. Those with less apparent talents do have an advantage, though, because pride and self-sufficiency may be less of a temptation for them. Notice how Peter defined himself in 2 Peter 1 verse 1, a bondservant and apostle of Jesus Christ. He was no longer a man motivated by self-interest. Once he followed Jesus, he saw himself as a servant of God. We too are called to serve the King of Kings with whatever abilities and gifts and talents he has given us. Let's see here. Genesis 25:27 through 34, you've read the story. This story really connects with men, okay? We can understand how Esau felt. If you're not familiar, Esau came in from the field starving, sold his birthright to Jacob for a bowl of lentil stew. Long day in the fields. He had been hunting. He was tired. He was hot. He was hungry. He was so hungry, and so much so that his desire for immediate gratification overruled his self-control. He had no thought for the future. He saw this stew, he smelled it, and he knew he wanted it right then. We've all been there, literally and figuratively. Just before mealtime, maybe you're raiding the fridge, something to tide you over. You know, gotta have something now. I've got teenagers in the house, and it's funny to be reminded how ravishing a teenager's appetite can be. I remember those days when I was eating 7 or 8 burrito supremes at Taco Bell and still being hungry. Food's just the beginning, though. New electronic toys beckon. How many people have lined up for the greatest iPhone, iPad, whatever? Our vehicle's odometer turns to a certain number of miles. We start thinking about a new car. or the latest vacation spot beckons. So to get what we want, we unadvisedly bust the budget, right? We see an alluring woman, and lust sparks our desire. We take a step closer, our appetite overrules self-control, but there's always a price to pay. There's no doubt about it, while we're in this body, we're consumed with a gnawing sense that we have a hole in our lives that needs to be filled. We don't have everything we want and need for our gratification. Material things and experiences. We try everything, both good and bad, but no matter how much money we make or what kind of pursuits we chase after, that hunger for more still eats away at us. Always. Instead of going to God's Word for direction when tough temptations loom, we use our gut instead of our brains. Or worse, we fly on autopilot, not giving a second thought to the consequences of our actions. Like Esau giving up his birthright for some bread and stew, we sometimes exchange true joy for a temporary thrill, or a blessed future for immediate fulfillment. We carelessly toss aside our imperishable spiritual birthright for a consumable and fleeting fantasy. As long as we're in this flesh, this fight will continue. Flesh fighting against spirit, fighting against what we know to be right. Each and every one of us can identify with Paul when he said, "I hate that sin that I keep doing. Why do I keep doing it?" God will guard you from the evil one. Psalm 121 in the New Living Testament says, "I look up to the mountains. Does my help come from there? My help comes from the Lord, who made the heavens and the earth. He will not let you stumble and fall, the one who watches over you and will not sleep. Indeed, he who watches over Israel never tires and never sleeps. The Lord himself watches over you. The Lord stands beside you as your protective shade. The sun will not hurt you by day, nor the moon at night. The Lord keeps you from all evil and preserves your life. The Lord keeps watch over you as you come and go, both now and forever." You know, Psalm 121 is a collection of songs of ascent, sung by Jewish pilgrims on their way to Jerusalem for one of Israel's great feasts. It's a hymn of trust that God will watch over his people as they journey along potentially dangerous roads up to the holy city of Judea. Does God say that his people will never encounter trouble? No. The awful truth is that even Christians get robbed and mugged, raped and murdered. Statistics indicate that more followers of Jesus were martyred for their faith in the 20th century than in the previous 19 centuries combined. You'll not find any biblical evidence to suggest that believers are exempt from the ugly violence of a fallen world. You know, Jesus said in Matthew 10:28, "At worst, evil people can only kill your body, they cannot touch your soul." Jesus also said, "You will have trouble in this world, but take heart. I have already overcome this world." And guess what, my brothers and sisters? Since Christ is in you, the hope of glory, you too have already overcome. A lot of you just don't see that yet. I hope and pray you will. God bless you guys. Good Lord willing, I'll see you again tomorrow.